Well, good morning. As you're aware, the governor wants to extend his emergency powers. Every 30 days, he must call us back into a special session. The first thing we will do in the Senate is to vote to remove the emergency powers. We do not think that the governor should continue the emergency powers. The emergency part of the pandemic is over. We have all the personal protection equipment we need. We have everything in place. And if you look at the number of people that need the ICU beds and the number of people that are dying, it has dramatically dropped over the last month or so. And so we don't think the emergency's there. Frankly, if something happened late fall, the governor can call the emergency powers again. So it's time to end those. We think it's important that the House and Senate have equal footing with the governor. That's how it's supposed to work, that the two bodies work together. So that'll be the first thing we do. Then after that, we will likely adjourn in the Senate. We have to wait, not sine die, but just adjourn, because we have to wait for bills to come out of the House. We've been working on a bonding bill, a tax bill with some tax relief for farmers, small business owners, and others. And those two may come together into one bill, but that would be in the House that would come out of. It has to originate in the House. The other major area that we've been working on is police accountability. We have not stopped working on that since the end of last special session, and it feels like there's real progress that has been happening there. There's certain things that we said that we would not do. The Senate Republicans would not defund the police. The Senate Republicans did not want to dismantle the police, and that was the Minneapolis City Council members that did that. That was, you heard Congressman Omar talk about that, but we are working with a number of Democrats that want to work on some of the other reforms. Banning chokeholds would be one of the things that there seems to be agreement. The duty to intervene if a police officer sees another police officer, they must intervene. Mental health issues, autism issues. We talked about adding more people to the post board, a couple more citizens. So a number of things that we've been working on. It's always the tough part is getting the details in the language, but it does feel like there's been progress there. So those are some of the key areas that we're working on. But again, we will decide how long we're going to adjourn for. At the longest, it will be 1 week. The House has its own issues that they have to work out. You have to talk to them about how they get these things done. So with that, we can take questions on anything, and I've got Senator Benson, my deputy leader, here as well to answer questions.
Senator Zucka, one thing that you didn't mention in your list of police reform possibilities was the use of force doctrine. Where is that? Is that part of the discussion? Are you coming close to an agreement on that particular element?
Yes, we definitely have a conversation about that as well. The House has language, the Senate has language. We're trying to work through that. We're reaching out to all interested parties about what the best language is and why. I didn't find out till yesterday that the post board in Minnesota has asked for an independent national firm to audit the post board about what are the things that they could do to improve. So as we think about that, that report will likely come out in September, October, and so we want to know, what are some of those things as well. So, but yes.
Well, if I could follow up with that, I understand that from the hearing, I think it was Chair Mayani mentioned that ET had finally gotten a response to their counteroffer. Are you working off of that document at that point, and what's on that document? We haven't seen that.
Well, there's been a number of offers back and forth, so it would not be accurate that in any way the Senate Republicans have been stonewalling the process, which I've heard a number of them say. I've personally had conversations with Representative Mariani, Representative Moran, people on my side of the aisle, particularly Senator Bobby Joe Champion within the last week. We are trying to move to a place that we can agree. I laid out some principles that we don't agree on, and so if we can set those, keep those off the table and work on the things we do, I expect us to get something done.
Why vote to end the peacetime emergency today at a time when the infection rate is growing and it appears that the coronavirus is once again a threat?
So the question is, why would we vote to remove emergency powers today when it appears the infection rate is growing? The two numbers that we look at is the number of deaths and the number of beds that are used. Because if you test more people, you're going to get more situations, and as people get out and about in the public more, you're going to have more people infected. But are more people dying? And the answer is no. Those numbers are going down dramatically. And so we have to figure out how to function safely within our society while we address moving through this. And so that's why we think we should do that. The emergency part of it is over. We had to make sure that we had a system in place to have the beds that we needed if we needed them. Turns out we haven't needed them yet. We had to make sure, that we had all of those resources available. All of that's in place. So now it's a matter of how do we navigate through. Esme.
If I could just ask you to follow up on that. Look at the other states. A lot of people have relatives or family in these other states like Arizona, Florida, and Texas, where it's a crisis now. We are not at a crisis, and you're right, the deaths are down, but we had the highest number of new cases since late May, just a couple of days ago, and the spike amongst young adults, late teenagers and early 20s is at record highs here in Minnesota. Is this really the time to be stripping the governor of his ability to act quickly?
So we have acted quickly, and that's why we have everything in place. If you look to the southern states, it's really about being indoors, and that looks a little different than some of the outdoor activity. And if you look at younger people being infected, that's not the same as saying younger people are dying. Nobody has died under age 20 from COVID-19 in Minnesota, unless that's changed in the last week. Nobody has, which is the other reason why we're talking about we need to get back to opening up our schools and letting our local school boards and administrators decide how they're going to manage that. Otherwise, the kids are falling behind on education as well, but that's why.
Senator, if the governor decides to do some sort of a mask mandate, whether it be statewide or some sort of regionalized thing, what is your caucus's stance on that? And would you possibly vote to override that and hopes of getting some support from the House?
Well, we think that people should be able to wear a mask or not wear a mask at their choosing, particularly if you're in a very congested indoor place. It's a good idea to wear a mask if you can't practice safe distancing. Doesn't seem to be any major problems outside as far as infection rates, but I think mandating it is a mistake. I think encouraging people to be responsible for their health and the health of others is a good idea.
What about a regional mandate, like Metro and maybe the Metro centers like St. Cloud or Duluth or Rochester?
Well, Minneapolis and St. Paul, I believe, have already mandated that. So I think, we don't need a statewide or the governor making that decision for people. So, yes.
Rochester has a mandate as well. For the federal government declining funding for rebuilding, is that going to change anything with what has been in the bonding proposal, moving any kind of dollars toward rebuilding since we won't be getting the federal money?
No, at this point, we're working on provisions that affect the entire state. So if it's good for Minneapolis, it has to be good for outstate as well. So, for example, in the tax bill, we have something called Section 179 that allows businesses to deduct expenses up front. It also applies to the ag community, so it would also apply to Minneapolis when they're buying new equipment. But tax breaks just for Minneapolis and St. Paul, we do not support. We tried earlier in the session to have a delay of taxes and a waiving of penalties for everybody in Minnesota. The administration did not support that, so for them to now expect us to do it just for Minneapolis, St. Paul, we don't think is fair.
We also know that testing has gone up as far as people being allowed access to it, not allowed, but having access to it, and the number of cases have gone up as well, exponentially, as we know. But nobody's saying anything about the protests and the rioting having really anything to do with it. In your opinion, do you believe that has something to do with it now that we're 3 weeks out of a lot of that?
I think most of it has been that we're testing more, and the fact that there weren't a big spike when there was rioting tells us a lot of the outdoor activities are not the problem.
Senator, what would you put the chances of a bonding bill getting passed this particular special session?
Well, I can tell you that the Senate is ready to pass the bonding bill. I believe it will be linked with the tax bill. but it has to originate in the House, and that's where I cannot predict it. They have a unique dynamics within the House that you'll have to ask your questions to them. Esme?
Just clarify, so you're going to vote on the special powers and then adjourn for up to a week?
Yes, we can't do anything until it comes from the House.
Okay, and so you'll be completely adjourned for a week. What makes you think that there could be agreements coming on any of these other issues, or the bonding, the police, in the next week?
I would say, I can say that the House and Senate majorities with the governor have worked through a bonding bill. Its size, what's in the bill, all of that is pretty much agreed to. There's a few policy provisions that we have to decide on. So, and same thing with the tax bill. The chairs of the House and Senate have pretty much agreed on a tax bill. The issue is you also have to have the support of the minority, and for Speaker Hortman, she also has to have support of different factions within her caucus, and that is a House issue. So we are ready in the Senate. I believe it would pass if it came to the Senate, but it has to come out of the House.
Okay, clarify first, do you anticipate it'll be the full week, or do you think it could just be a couple days before you?
Well, I was hoping we would do it today, a one-day session, we agree on it. If there isn't agreement in the House, then they have to have 3 different days. That puts us out to Wednesday. There are some activities going on. The Senate has hearings on Wednesday and Thursday that we don't intend to change. And so that it just complicated with other things going on, but which is why we want to give the House enough time to do their work. But if they can't send us the bill, then the Senate can't vote to approve it. But I can tell you the House and Senate majorities with the governor have a package of bonding and taxes that we, for all intensive purposes, have agreed to.
Can you clarify your position
What-
on the
one
opening
more?
of schools? A lot of families sitting on pins and needles,
Yeah.
uncertain about what's going to happen. What do you think should be the overarching advice? Apparently the governor's going to speak on this later this week.
Same thing I said a month ago, or maybe longer. I think the schools should be opened up for the classroom settings. I think primarily we should let our administrators and school boards decide. We do that for other things that they have addressed, whether it's snowstorms or the flu. For the flu, for example, if 10% of a school has it, then they close it down for a week. We can have protocol for schools, but to close it down completely, we already discovered that all kids, but particularly kids of color, go farther behind when they don't have the classroom settings. And so I think schools are essential, and we have essential businesses. I think we should be calling schools essential as well.
Can you tell us more about the bonding bill, what the total is, what's in it, what priorities are at this point?
Well, I can tell you that I said that it would be 1.35 GO. It's 1.5 GO, general obligation. There is a number for housing. There's a number for highway trunk bonds. I'd rather talk to the group rather than release it, but we have definite numbers. Beyond that, I'll wait. I don't want to, but the number I said had to be 1.35 is 1.35.
Senator, along that line, you believe you have the votes in the Senate to pass that bill?
Yeah, I do.
And what about on the House side?
I don't know.
I mean, I understand that it's separate, but I assume you've had conversation with the Speaker and the Minority Leader, and I know what the Minority Leader's objections are, but how does the Speaker generally feel about that? What's your sense of it?
Well, I think she and I have agreed that it's a fair bill, but I cannot speak for the House.
Senator Butler?
Yes.
With respect to this ongoing oversight committee, I wanted to get your assessment of how you think that's going, and I also wanted to get you to respond to something that Democrats have said consistently. They're complaining that this thing is focused on criminal activity, on rioting, on damage, on looting, on Christopher Columbus. They want to have a discussion about what happened to George Floyd, on why it happened. Senator Newman, who's controlling the committee, says he thinks that should happen too. Will that happen? When will it happen? And who's going to lead that conversation?
Well, first of all, the governor and the House and myself, as we've been working through the police accountability measures, have worked on a lot of those issues, and I think that side of it has been aired publicly quite a bit. The lawlessness issue has not been aired, and that's why we wanted to have it for the record what happened and when, so we would not forget it. And so That's why we asked Senator Newman to work on that, and he has worked on that. We want to document why. We brought in the Adjutant General from the National Guard. We've brought in all the different players and will bring in all the different players in so that people have a record of what happened and why. As far as George Floyd and police accountability, that also has been very public, and the fact that we're working on police reform is because of that, and so you just have to stay tuned with what we continue to do.
Well, what I'm asking is, will there be a sort of oversight committee style examination to the depth of what the George Floyd thing in this setting that there has been on the other?
Yeah, at this point, I don't expect that. You have the Attorney General that is engaged on the other side of the issue as well, so other entities have been focusing on that. Nobody was focusing on the lawlessness issue and why, and so that's why we picked that one up.
Along that line, Senator, the lawlessness issue that you're focusing on it, at some point when that has been fully examined by the Minnesota Senate, will your stance change as far as maybe giving some guidance to FEMA or about possibly reconsidering the disaster declaration, or as far as they're concerned, is that not justified under any circumstances?
Well, I don't know that FEMA has ever considered riots as a disaster. I realize that Minnesota and others are trying to create that as a new disaster category, but I've never heard that in the past. If that is the case, I just haven't heard of that. So, we'll see.
With respect to the bonding bill and tax changes, which I understand you're waiting for the House to work out, why not stay in session? There are other issues, obviously, to be negotiated. Why not stay in session and negotiate?
So the work still happens, but special sessions are always meant to be limited to a few things, and so we are focused on those things. We're not planning to have a lot of other bills make it through the process unless the four leaders agree, and probably the governor. They probably won't happen. We don't have additional money to spend, so the only other potential projects that have money would be COVID money or federal money, and unless the governor agrees, those aren't going to happen either. And so they're typically narrow, and we just want to make sure that we have the opportunity to do the bonding bill that we should have done during regular session, the tax relief bill. Police reform is what we added, and then maybe a small spending bill that was also in last special session. But other than that, we're not trying to do everything in a special session. That can wait till next January.
That's the supplemental budget that you mentioned is small.
There was a $58 million special or spending bill in last special, and that's still on the table, so we shall see.
Pardon me, you probably maybe have said this already, and I apologize if I'm asking it again, but can you tell us where you line up with the House in terms of the police reforms and where the major differences are? I think just in bullet points. Perhaps you said it already, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, most of the things we're exploring, what we're not exploring is defunding the police. We're not exploring dismantling the police. We're not doing felon voting. We're not allowing the Attorney General to have more power than he presently has. The rest of it's on the table, and we're talking through, and many of those things I think we can do. You never get 100%. I'm hoping we get 75% or 80% of the two sides. That, to me, would be a win.
What's your stance on arbitration and changing the arbitration procedures for officers?
Yeah. So the Senate offered reform to arbitration. We still are offering that. That's an issue we're working on.
Police reform was one of the big sticking points that kept the bonding bill from moving forward. In the last special session a month ago, Greater Minnesota, while we all know that police reform is a priority in Greater Minnesota, it is not as big of a priority as it is here in the Twin Cities. Is that likely to happen again, holding up the bonding bill? Because I know Greater Minnesotans are thinking much more about the bonding bill because it affects them more.
So the question about does police accountability stop a bonding bill or tax bill, not from the Senate Republican position. We think they should be separate. You'll have to ask the governor in the House.
Can I build off of Bill's question? Just any specific agreements on police reform that you didn't have at the end of the last special session? Certain areas where you now agree?
Could you repeat that one more time?
I'm curious if, comparing to the last special session, Are there certain areas where you have reached agreement that you could give us examples on police accountability?
Yes, but I'm not going to tell you yet.
How about on the issue of the chokeholds and duty to intervene? The language that you both have is similar, it's just the way you're getting there is different, and also the penalties that the House has. But if language means anything and words matter, it's close. Any movement on that?
Yes, but I can't tell you yet. I mean, but that is the issue. Every little word matters, and so we're trying to figure that out.
Senator, why not wait until the August revenue forecast comes out to make some of these spending decisions?
Well, would be a compromise with the governor. There is $58 million that they saved by having a hiring freeze. And like the Department of Corrections, for example, they have apparently a deficiency that we could help with. But we are hoping that the governor is still planning to do a forecast in August. That was something he promised earlier in the year. I hope that that is still the case, because we really do need a picture of where we're at, and August would be a number. And so I would ask that you all ask the governor, are we still going to do a August forecast? Because we never normally do one, but this year it's really important. So.
Senator, your conversations with the governor, I assume you've been having these, has he given you any indication that he might be willing to phase out some portions of his emergency power, say if the legislature were to enact provisions like the eviction provisions and so on and so forth? Is there any discussion down that way with the governor?
Minority Leader Doubt in the House has been trying to develop some language to narrow emergency powers just to COVID-19. We've had some reviews of that. I just don't know that we're going to get there. We think that either the House or the Senate should be able to stop an executive order. As it is right now, you're all aware that we can't end emergency powers unless both the House and the Senate agree. And if that's the same requirement for reforms, they probably won't work.
With that said, Senator, the governor has continued.
If I may, just a quick follow-up. So the way that you would like to proceed on this is to not require that both the House and Senate agree in order to veto the governor's power. Is that the way that you'd like to see it go?
Yes, and even if we don't get it during this pandemic, I hope that's for the future. So.
We'll take Betsy's question then.
Yep, last one.
We've asked the governor about his executive authority and why he isn't seeking legislative input as much as lawmakers are saying they would like during this. And he says that he is continuing to get legislative input, although he has the executive authority. Do you agree with that? Is he getting the input that we are hearing from his office that he says he's getting?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that he is telling us what he's doing, and we say we like it or we don't like it. But that's a little bit different perspective. So, all right, thank you.